This episode is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage, where screenwriters go to get their scripts read by top Hollywood professionals. Learn more at covermyscreenplay.com. In your book, Power to the Dark Side, you really dive into what is a great villain. What makes a great villain?
To me, it's a person that we can both have curiosity about and anathema towards. And so it's one thing to be seduced by somebody who's a little rakish and doing a little, gee, it's kind of halfway criminal maybe. What do you think? That's not necessarily villainous. To me, the villain is the person who poses actual real danger of some kind. Mm-hmm. And that can be mortal danger, like the, planet-killing Darth Vader and the Death Star. Mm-hmm. Or it can be that kind of danger that seduces you into doing things that you may know are not right, but you just kind of can't help yourself because you're being drawn into it. And then it turns you. But I don't think we need to have a total identification with a villain. In fact, I think less is probably more in that instance, because otherwise you're only speaking to the serial killers.
Right. So I'm always fascinated by villains. I mean, Hannibal Lecter is an amazing villain that you forget that he's a cannibal. He's a murderous cannibal. Yeah. And yet he is so charming and so disarming that you will have a Chianti and some fava beans with him. And you won't even, you'll be like, oh, are you eating my hand? Oh, it's fine, Hannibal. It's really remarkable. He was so not only well written, but so well performed by Anthony Hopkins. That's a villain that pops into your head. That's like that seductive villain that truly makes you forget. And he's not hiding who he is. It's not like, oh, you discover he's a cannibalistic murderer. No, it's right up front. The first time you hear his name, it's associated with murder and cannibalism. And yet you're rooting for him in that movie, in the first movie.
That's brilliant writing. And it's, I think it's something to strive for, that push-pull of the lure of the dark side, and still to hold that reticence, or to have the reticence come back in, and you've gone too many steps down that wrong path. But it's a very interesting scale, I would say. Also, like just about anything in story, or just about anything in life, there's a spectrum. And so you've got the light dark side, the light side of the dark, where you've got the comedic villains.
Right.
And then you've got those more, the Hannibal and the Darth Vader. All those people, too, out of history that you think captured so many imaginations and got so many people to follow them. What was it? What was that lure? So I've always found that really fascinating. And that's part of what stirred my impetus to write the book, was to say, how do these things happen, and why, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, so how does a villain, who, again, a villain is all perspective in history. Let's talk about history, not cinema, for a second. But in history, okay, it's about perspective. So Napoleon, depending on what side of the fence you're on, he's either a hero or a villain. Unfortunately, someone like Hitler, depending on what side of the fence you are on, it's all about perspective. How does someone seduce a nation? It's like seducing one or two characters, seducing a group, but to seduce a nation, even these cults that you saw, I forgot the names, but Jim Jones is the one that rings truest right now off the top of my head, who he seduced, I don't know, hundreds of people to fly down to South America and then essentially drink Kool-Aid, spoiler alert, drink poison Kool-Aid, and commit suicide. So that's that kind of villain. But then to have the kind of villain that can literally change the minds of the majority of a nation to do just just crazy, insane, destructive, disgusting things. What is it about, that if we could study someone like Napoleon or Hitler or Mussolini, or all these insane villains in history, what could we take from those stories and maybe apply them to a story that we're writing with a really bad guy?
Okay. I think we have to back up a few steps.
A couple.
Talk about, so in evolutionary psychology, what we see is that, and you find this in Maslow's pyramid of needs, you find it in the chakra system, the very lowest point for any living creature is survival. That's your prime directive, is to survive. So if someone gets you into a fearsome situation and then offers you salvation from it, then you are more likely to follow them. Be it a religion that makes you afraid of this particular sin or that particular horrible, the Manichaean, the dark, the light side. I came across an interesting thing in a book about philosophy and humor, and they said you can tell a lot about a religion by what is the worst thing you can do in it. And for Catholics, it's missing Mass. For Baptists, it's dancing. And for Episcopalians, it's using your salad fork on the dessert.
Yeah.
So tapping into the fear of a nation, tapping into people's concerns for their own livelihood is, and particularly if they've been defeated or they're marginalized, and then they are fearful, and you come along and you say, it's not your fault, it's their fault.
And there you go. And we're off and running, as they say. And you can kind of see that, as a pattern throughout history. All of those dictators that we kind of talked about did that to rise to power. Once they got to power, it's a different conversation. They all did different things to maintain power or lose power or so on. But to rise to that power, Hitler specifically did exactly that.
Yes.
He villainized a group of people and said, "You guys, I feel everybody's pain. You guys, it's not your fault. It's their fault. And I'm going to bring us back to our glory." And that was it.
Yeah. And you see that also in a couple of recent historical events, in the Khmer Rouge with Pol Pot, and then in the Cultural Revolution in China with Mao, where you also had not only this fear, people were in many cases starving, they were poverty stricken, but also there was a comparison. Oh, these people are better off than you. Why? And so then you start finding that disparity between the value systems and the worth of in a system. The thinkers, the creatives, and those who aren't. And often those who aren't, they really are. They just haven't been given the opportunity to do so. So that's when you start finding, first we go in and we kill all the thinkers, we kill all the artists, we burn all the books. And you can get a lot of people who don't have access to those things to go after the elites. It's a very, very old system of social manipulation.
So one of the oldest, I don't think he's the oldest, but one of the oldest original bad boys, if you will, is the devil. He is the original villain, one of the original villains, I think. I think the Epic and Gilgamesh might have had another villain, and there might have been a couple other ones prior to the devil. But the devil's got a great PR firm. He is, wow, we all know about the devil. What makes, and especially in cinema, and in story in general, but in cinema, the devil is so seductive and attractive. What makes that kind of villain so attractive to people?
Okay, I think a couple of things. One is the power that they hold.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are aligned with the devil, then you
Ah.
share in that power and you will get those goodies. And a lot of humans are more focused on, well, as that line from Postcards from the Edge where Carrie Fisher says, instant gratification takes too long. So, you know, most of us want what we want. We want it now. And it's okay if there's a big balloon payment at the end, because who knows? There may not be an end. This could go on forever.
Oh
So,
yes, the stock markets are infamous for that.
yes,
Infamous for that. Isn't
true.
you heard that story about GameStop that just came out the
Yes,
other day? If
yes.
everyone listening, a bunch of Reddit investors are basically hijacking the Wall Street, the stock market. It is fascinating to watch, and it actually does show what the realities of the stock market is. It's essentially a game in many, many, many ways, all about perspective and talk about villains. Um,
Yeah.
Jeez,
Oh, yeah.
Wall Street's got just. I just watched a documentary on Ivan Boesky, and I was just like, oh my God, Michael Milken from the '80s and what these guys did. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fascinating. So I love the idea of the power aspect of villains because villains generally, not always, have a power. And it could be a grand power or it could be Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, which is just power over his victim. I mean, there is a sense of power. There's never, and correct me if I'm wrong, are there villains who they can't be weaker? They have to be more powerful than whoever they're going against, or at least a perceived power. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. What it seems to me is indeed the villain can appear weak,
Yeah, of
but
course. Yeah.
turn back, it's a trap. Oh, it's like you're limping along and come help me and okay, now that you're here,
Right,
right?
exactly. So there's always the villain. So everyone listening, the villain always has to be at least a bit more powerful than whoever they're going up against. And if there isn't, then if your hero is obviously stronger than the villain, then it's a weak story because then what's the point? I mean, if I could just beat you up, it's like if I'm the good guy and the bad guy is a 7-year-old girl with a spoon who's really bad and has done bad stuff. Obviously I'm going to be able to. That's why like films like Chucky always used to bother me. I'm like, it's a doll.
Just
It's
throw a blanket over it and
just
bump.
kick it. It's like 3 feet tall and it's a doll. It has no magical powers. Just kick it, but then and that's why it's like so difficult to write for characters who are gods like Superman, like Zeus, and even going back to the gods. It was difficult to write stories around something that's like Superman's a perfect example. It's almost impossible to write really good Superman stories because he's Superman. So you need to have someone bigger than Superman, which is hard, or at least equal to, and it's difficult to do. That's why it's just so hard sometimes to write for those kinds of heroes. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and that's why you need kryptonite.
You need something to weaken them.
You need something to weaken them if they are a strong person, and whether it is their emotional attachment to something, whether it's being physically debilitated by the kryptonite, whatever that is. Absolutely. And that balance, not equity, but that balance that keeps shifting between the villain and the hero, the protagonist and the antagonist. You don't want even, but you want it real close so that you can get the ups and the downs that make a story interesting.
The one there's two villains that I have in my head that I found to be really complex because they have a point of view, and I've always found that villains with points of views make the best villains. So someone like Thanos from the Marvel universe who was so strong, so powerful. It literally took every superhero to defeat him. They literally, like all of them, to defeat this guy. That's how powerful he was. His point of view wasn't wrong. He, in the sense of the universe is overcrowded. There's not enough resources to go around. Something has to change. Now that right there is a conversation starter. Where the conversation ends is I'm going to now destroy half the population in the universe with a flick of my finger or a snap of my finger. That's where he turned bad. So it was just his perspective was you can agree with him. Like, yeah, dude, there's a problem, but I don't agree with the way you're doing it. And that makes that villain so good. And Black Panther was another villain, Killmonger. He was like, my life was stolen from me. You got it, and you completely identify and are empathetic to him. Now, how he's trying to take power and doing it the way is wrong, but yet you feel for him, as opposed to the early days of cinema, of silent cinema, where you had the guy twisting the mustache on the railroad, and that was as one-dimensional as you got as far as a villain's concerned.
Yes. Much more fascinating when there is this may not be the right combination of words, but a misguided altruism.
Yeah. That's actually good. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the world would be better if, and then what you pointed out, but your methodology, dude, you got to work on that.
That's not. Yeah, I get you. Maybe we could put some programs in place, but the snapping of the finger and killing everybody, half of everybody, it's a bit extreme, sir. I get it. I get it. Yeah, and it's, but I always found that so fascinating, because that character arguably was in one of the biggest movies of all time, and they built that villain up over the course of a decade, just building him up slowly and slowly and slowly, and it crescendoed in the end game, which is why people watch that end sequence in that movie and just, I was in the theater back when you could go to theaters. You heard just the emotional release of what they had been doing, and also on the opposite side of that, did you ever watch The Walking Dead?
Maybe one episode.
In the show, in the show, the main antagonist of the show, and there were some antagonists that show up like bad guys, official villains, but for a little while, the main villain was. Zombies were kind of just like the threat, and survival was essentially what they were fighting. They were just fighting the threat, and there was no main bad guy. Then a few seasons in, they got the governor, who's a really great complex bad guy, but then they brought in this character named Negan, and Negan was so overpowering that it ruined the show for me. Because I stopped watching after watching 6 years, because the villain did not give the heroes a win ever. Even if you're fighting a villain that's so powerful, you got to be able to get a punch in. For like 10 episodes, they were just beating and beaten and beaten and never gave them a moment's breath. And it was so disheartening for you to watch your heroes get beaten like that. I think the writing suffered so bad, and the show started to completely go down. It wasn't just me. Everyone got tired of it, and now it's gone. I think it's gone, or it's about to go away completely, because they just ruined it with that. It jumped the shark, as they say. But it was the villain that caused it. That villain was so overpowering, and they never gave him a win until like towards the end of the season. But by that time, you were so exhausted. You're just like, I'm over. I'm done.
Yeah. You're pointing out a good example of, once again, that balance that needs to be there. And when the imbalance is too overwhelming, you get what you just were talking about. If the people haven't seen it, there's a charmingly funny, cartoon video. It's like Godzilla versus Bambi.
It's great. It's such a.
Right? What lasts like 10 seconds maybe, but it just makes the point.
I think I saw it in the theater. I saw that in the theater when it came out. I think it was like in the 70s or 80s when that came out. But
So,
for everyone listening, this is basically the movie. This is basically the short film. It's Bambi versus Godzilla, and you see Bambi just sitting there eating, just like la 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 la, and then all of a sudden Godzilla's foot comes and stomps it. The end. That's it. Brilliant. But your point in that story.
well, yeah, once again, if it's too imbalanced, it doesn't work. Just like a Super Bowl game. You're not going to put the Chiefs against the Dalhart, Texas varsity football team, right? No, you have to have somewhat evenly matched, or you don't put the heavyweight against the flyweight. And think even, let's talk about waging bets.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not some kind of odds to be had,
It's boring.
It's boring. And
on both sides. So if you have a hero that constantly is beating on the villain, I'm like, why am I watching this? This is just abusive. And if the villain's constantly beating on the hero and there's no opportunity for a comeback, like for something to happen, then it doesn't work. So that's why Rocky works so well as not only a movie but as a series, with a couple of exceptions in that series, is where just a couple, but it was essentially what you were saying. The Chiefs versus the varsity football team from your high school was Rocky going against Apollo. He was the heavyweight champion of this guy was a knee breaker, a bum, but those odds were. That's why that will resonate forever, because it was just the ultimate comeback story. And if we go back to Star Wars, the rebels against the Death Star.
yes,
I mean, it's one little dude in a hall, flying through a cavern, and shoots one little missile into one little hole and explodes the whole thing. Like, it's so overwhelming. And by the way, horrible design of the Death Star, whoever designed the Death Star, to have that kind of vulnerability. Let's not even talk about that. I mean, oops. I mean, come on, guys. You could have just put a flap on it. It's not that difficult. I mean, seriously. I mean, come on. But again, that kind of that odd. So you can't have a villain that is seemingly overpowered, but you've got to give the hero a shot. Me walking in with Mike Tyson, even at my age and his age, I'm not going to win that fight. There's just, it's not going to happen. There's no way I'll ever be able to. I don't even think I'd touch him. I think he'd hit me 30 times before I even blinked, even at this age where he is right now. So there has to be, like you said, that balance with villains. And I think I don't know, I can't think of any bad examples of it, but in cinema, when you watch a bad movie with a bad villain, it's because of the imbalancing of it, or that the villain is just so, there's no depth to it, or it's so one-dimensional. It becomes the mustache twirling kind of villain, and there's just nothing there. And that's, but when you have a great, like Hans Gruber in Die Hard, mean, wonderful villain, just so wonderfully written, wonderfully played. And then against the hero, which is Bruce Willis, John Mcclane, the power struggle is really interesting in that movie, because John Mcclane is pretty much on the ropes the entire movie.
Oh, yeah. And barefoot for a lot of it, too.
Which was such a brilliant choice, by the way. Such a brilliant choice to make him barefoot. So he's running over glass and he's... So brilliant. They didn't give him boots. I mean, that was like, they gave him, it was barefoot. So that's like another level. It was so brilliantly done. But John is pretty much on the ropes the entire movie. And Hans is not particularly a imposing physical villain, but he's a villain whose intellectual and his resources are very substantial, which is his team, essentially, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, Alan Rickman has that ability to just give the stare that withers.
So good.
You could just raise his eyebrow and you just go, oh, okay, fine.
To watch the rest of this interview, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.